Hi, and welcome to Tech Talk here at Microsoft in Berlin. My name is Joanna Reichertz, and it's my great pleasure to welcome today as our guest Casper Klynge. Casper has been with Microsoft since 2020, and he is our Vice President for European Government Affairs. But prior to that, Casper was a diplomat, but not just any type of diplomat, but actually Denmark's and the world's first ever ambassador to the global technology industry based in Silicon Valley. Casper, it's really great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for coming.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. So we'd love to use this opportunity of having you here in Berlin to hear a little more about your views on some of the key issues that the incoming federal government will need to tackle in order to successfully manage Germany's digital but also sustainable transformation in the years to come. So I'd suggest we kick it off with a topic that's been both top of mind for many European leaders, but actually also Microsoft for quite some time now, and that is European digital sovereignty. I'm going to go back a bit to your roots with this maybe, but I'd say that from a diplomatic perspective, one way to think about the European project in its very origins is as a quest to create a balanced and collaborative approach to sovereignty, right? That's based on shared values. And now we fast forward to 2021 and to the era of digitalization. And I'm wondering what shared values, in your view, form the basis of the European digital agenda today. And why do you think that digital sovereignty is an important element of that?
Yeah, no, listen, Joanna, a great question and a super difficult question to kick us off. And I don't know whether it was symbolic, but European Commission President von der Leyen was on the same plane as I was, coming from Brussels to Berlin a few hours ago. So I think it feels very appropriate to bring sort of the broader European agenda also here to Berlin at a timely moment. Of course, it is not our role to advise the coalition formation on the priorities. I think what we can help with is perhaps identify how Microsoft in Europe can be supportive of all governments at a, I think, pretty critical moment in time. We are still, unfortunately, not through COVID yet. As we are speaking together here, Joanna, in Berlin, I just left Brussels this morning with new restrictions being implemented. That unfortunately means that we will be working from home for a while yet. And I think COVID-19 has shown two things. I mean, first of all, that if you imagine that this global pandemic had happened just a few years ago, I think we would have been in a much more difficult situation because we wouldn't have had the same digital tools that we actually have today. So, I normally see you not in physical person, but on Teams calls here from Berlin to Brussels. And I think that has been a fantastic indication of how important digitalization and new technology is for our societies today. But I think the flip side of the coin, and certainly something I hear a lot from European decision makers, is of course also this sense of dependency on technology companies or technology platforms that are out and about. And I think that actually goes to the core of your question around digital sovereignty, which of course has another terminology, strategic autonomy. And not to be too historical, but if you look at the word autonomy, it actually comes from Greek auto and nomos, which fundamentally means sort of self and law. And I actually think that's an important sort of definition of how we look at strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty. It is ultimately about being in control. It is about taking decisions independently. And I think that's something has always been important in Europe, whether it's here in Berlin, if it's in Brussels or in Athens, that European decision makers, of course, want to define the future for Europe in a way that is consistent with European values, European rules, European aspirations. And I think, again, not becoming too historically, but I used to work for the European Union. I think, being a pretty big fan of the EU project, it has always been about actually redefining sovereignty to the specific challenges of a specific moment in time. And if we go back to the Rome Treaty, it was about bringing European countries together at a moment where there were difficulties in the collaboration between European nation states. If you go all the way up to the Maastricht Treaty, where the European Union is today, it is really finding that balance between sort of the sovereignty in the traditional sense and then a new sovereignty which also takes into account, interdependent world, a global connected world where technology is cross-border, but still having a sense that we need to be in control. And I'll stop talking now. The only thing I would say is that I think for us as a big technology company in Microsoft, we have to embrace the notion that European decision makers, and I'm sure also the coalition forming here in Germany, will be very interested in making sure that it is German decision makers that defines the future for Germany. And our role will be to supply technology and digital solutions that will ultimately give Europeans what they're looking for, including in terms of sovereignty.
Thank you so much. And that's actually the perfect transition for the follow-up question, because in many ways, I would say the debate about digital sovereignty is about Europe's relation to the United States, because many big tech companies, as you just mentioned, come from the United States. So naturally, US legislation will have fairly direct implications for European customers. However, you're also arguing that joining forces across the Atlantic can really help promote European values, and that the recent launch of the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, or in short TTC, is actually a super important opportunity to tackle shared challenges. So I was wondering, what are your hopes for that TTC? And from your perspectives, what are the key issues that the TTC will need to tackle in order to prove as a success?
Yeah, and I mean, I hope nobody's listening in, but I think a small sort of slightly provocative thing to say would be to say that in many ways European values are also American values and vice versa. And I think that's a good way of looking at the world. And I would not be frank if I said that I don't think there are other values out and about, including in the technology industry, that are perhaps competing with what I would call sort of a Euro-Atlantic set of common values, which is about defending democracy. It's about free media, free press. It is about human rights and fundamental rights as well. So I'm a pretty big transatlanticist, not only because I work for Microsoft like you do, but also because, growing up here in Europe, I am a little bit older than you, unfortunately, as you can see by the color of my hair, which means that I actually experienced the last part of the Cold War. And I saw, the Berlin Wall coming down. I still remember very clearly in high school, my first year when that happened, and sort of the sense of a completely new world opening up because Europe was reuniting. But I also felt, and have always felt since, incredibly close partnership with the United States and an emphasis, in my view, of the importance of us sticking together. And it goes without saying we've had some difficult years for the transatlantic relationship. We're now back in business. We have a US administration with President Biden that is very focused on reshaping that transatlantic relationship. We saw that also with his visit in the early summer in Brussels. And now with the Trade and Technology Council kicking off, and I think Microsoft have been here in Germany since 1983. Exactly. So it's a long, and I will not ask whether that is before and after you were born, but let's leave it sort of constructively ambiguous.
Let's just leave that up in the air.
We'll leave that up in the air. I think we feel, home, both in the US, but also here in Europe. But we also feel there is more that can be done. And the good thing about the Trade and Technology Council is that it really brings, with 10 different working groups, a focus on some of the key issues today. It's about artificial intelligence, it's about cybersecurity, it's about trade, and it is ultimately, in my view, about bringing US decision makers and European decision makers together at a moment where I think we have a huge interest on both sides of the Atlantic in collaborating on the regulatory framework that is becoming, an absolutely key bit. Sustainability could be another area, but bringing us together is one area where I think we need to support the Trade and Technology Council. There was a good meeting in Pittsburgh some weeks ago. We'll have another meeting here in Europe. We'll see perhaps in France during the French presidency of the European Union. And I think we need to support the work being carried forward. We have a keen interest in finding joint solutions across the Atlantic.
Thank you, and I very much agree. And I'd actually, you already mentioned it, like to delve a little deeper into the topic of cybersecurity that you just mentioned as a high potential area for transatlantic cooperation. You recently said that, and now I'm quoting.
Oh my God, I hope it's okay what I said.
It's a great quote. Today's weapons of cyber warfare threaten the future of our societies and the stability of our governments, industries, and infrastructure. So I was thinking, if there is, as you argue, a common threat to our societies, governments, industries, then what, in your view, should a common response to that threat look like?
And if you don't mind, Johanna, I'll actually use a concrete example of where I really saw the light around how important cybersecurity is. And it was before joining Microsoft. I was, a bilateral ambassador to Indonesia, sitting in Jakarta when one of the big, attacks at NotPetya hit back in 2017. And there was a very large Danish company, a shipping company, and we'll mention no names here, that was particularly hard hit by this attack. And of course, being at an embassy, we were trying to assist this company. And what happened was it basically wiped out the digital infrastructure of this particular company in a very concrete way. Every day when a new container ship arrived in port in Jakarta, they could not, clear what was in each of the individual containers, wanting to unload it, offload it. And I was involved in physically trying to assist with that. And my point with this example is just, for me, it was a wake-up call in how fundamental cybersecurity attacks can be, in this case, for a company that I think delivers infrastructure, bringing goods around the world. But what we've seen since 2017, unfortunately, as also identified in our recent Microsoft Digital Defense Report, is that the number of attacks, the number of cyber attacks are going up. And the unfortunate bit is that this is both state actors and non-state actors. And today, they're not only targeting, a shipping company, they're also targeting our hospitals, our energy systems, our government structures, and a lot of individual companies. So I guess the point here is that, leaning back to your previous question, in my view, it's very difficult to have digital sovereignty without cybersecurity. And unfortunately, in today's world, again, when I grew up, it was about, perhaps soldiers going across a border. Today, it's about digital cyber attacks that knows no borders. And unfortunately, in that kind of world, we need the public sector and the private sector to collaborate a lot. So I think one of the big issues that we're facing these days is, how do we create a set of norms, a set of rules, traffic rules, that will indicate to everybody what is acceptable and what is not acceptable? Now, does that mean that everybody will follow the rules? No, it doesn't. But you might also find outside the office here in Berlin people walking across a red light, but they will still know that.
We're in Germany, Casper.
So they don't do that. Ordnung muss sein. Ordnung muss sein. Of course, forgive me for being so culturally inappropriate. But my point is that we still have rules, despite rules once in a while being broken. And that's one of the areas where we're also leaning into helping define the norms for cybersecurity. But we also need to make sure that we bring the private sector and the public sector together, information sharing. Today, as you know better than anybody, we have more than 3,000 people working 24/7 just on cybersecurity, protecting our customers, protecting our partners. And that is the new digital reality. We are part of the first responders for these kind of attacks, and we need to work more closely together because it's not going to disappear.
Thank you so much. So we're already at our final question, and for the end I'd like to zoom out a bit and take a look at the broader picture. We've talked a good deal about digitalization now, but in fact for a successful transformation of the German, the European economy, we're looking at a dual challenge, right? Because in order to develop sustainably, yes, we do have to become more digital, but also our economies have to become more sustainable. Now, Microsoft was actually a principal partner at the UN Global Climate Conference, COP26 in Glasgow. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on why COP26 is such an important event to Microsoft as a technology company. And then maybe building on that, what role you think technology can play in tackling climate change, but also in promoting sustainability more broadly?
Yeah, no, a great question to end up with, Joanna. And I think this is really one of the areas where, again, sitting in Europe, where we can be proud of being Europeans and proud of what Europe has done, because in many ways, I think Europe has shown the kind of leadership, not only for this region, but across the world, that is really pushing forward the twin transition of focusing both on digitalization. Again, as we both know, that has been such an obvious necessity during COVID-19, but also doing it in a sustainable way and doing it in a just way that means that everybody will benefit from this twin transition. Now, going back to Glasgow a few weeks ago now, we are a partner because of two things. I think there are two areas where Microsoft is trying to make a difference. One area is by setting very ambitious targets for ourselves. So we have an internal carbon tax on how our different groups are operating that is benefiting also to setting very high ambitions for ourselves. We've also set some goals for us. We will become carbon negative by 2030. And I think what is the most impressive target we have is we'll remove all legacy emissions going back to 1975 before the year 2050. Very ambitious targets, and targets that perhaps today we're not able to fulfill. We need new technology, we need new innovations in doing that. But I think what came out very clearly at COP26 in Glasgow, where our President and Vice Chair Brad Smith was participating, is also that perhaps you know, the biggest thing we can do in support of fighting climate change is actually not what we do ourselves, although I do think it's important. It's also what we can do for our partners, for our customers. And I would point to one thing that we were trying to make very clear is that in order to set, you know, a very ambitious target around carbon emissions, you need to be able to measure carbon. And I think what we can do with our technology, sustainability cloud, working with customers, is to help identify a global system where that measurement becomes more precise, because, you know, if you want to measure something, you need the data sets behind it. And I think that's one area where also the European Union would be interested in a closer partnership with us. So I think, you know, the measurement bit is going to be, you know, one of our clear priorities moving ahead, and then making sure that we can do sort of almost plug and play products for our customers, so that we help not only big enterprises like ourselves, but also small and medium enterprises that, I think here in Germany, but also everywhere else, is the backbone of the European economy. And it is so much more difficult if you have a 10-person, you know, small or medium-sized enterprise to live up to all these goals and expectations. And I think this is where we can come in and help with our technology.
Right. Thank you so much. I'd love to end on this constructive and hopeful note. So again, thank you so much for your time today, Casper. It's great having you in Berlin, and hope to welcome you back soon. Thank you.
Always ready. Thanks a lot. It's great to be here. Thanks, Joanna.